All right. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us this edition of Leak Project. I'm your host, Rex Bear. We have John Desouza with us. This guy is the alter ego of Fox Mulder, the real X-Man. One of my favorite series of all time is X-Files. There's so many gems in there. And I'm going to ask as many questions as I can with the amount of time that John has with us. But first of all, I got to say, John, it's an honor to speak with you. Thank you so much for coming on the show. How the heck are you?
Thank you so much, Rex. It is great to be on here with you. You know, you're like the hardest working man on YouTube. You're like the James Brown of YouTube. I'm listening to you 1 minute. I'm listening to you during the day. And then here you are again, live. I mean, you just never stop going. It's awesome. The work that you do for the alternative community is awesome.
Thank you very much, folks. I paid him to say that. So, but if you enjoy what you're doing, is it really work? And I guess it is, but I love what I do. And I feel like if I wasn't doing this here, I used to do this for Fortune 100 companies that I work for, like during lunch hour and stuff, I'd be talking about the same kind of stuff. So wherever I am, I'm talking about this. So I might as well do it here with you guys. But first of all, if you would, for the audience, because the last interview that you did with Jay, I read through a few of the comments. So just to get rid of the trolls right off the bat. Could you prove that you used to work for the FBI and you used to teach FBI agents how to be investigators?
Sure, absolutely. I'm John Desouza. You know, I'm pretty well known in the intel community. I was a special agent in the FBI actually for 25 years. I was. As a matter of fact, this pin I have on right now is what is given as the 25-year pin. Service pin in the FBI. It is what it is. And behind me on the wall where I'm putting my finger right now is my plaque that actually has my credentials that I use, my real credentials that I used during my time in the FBI. What they do is they give it to you so that you don't go and like rob banks, you know, later on with your creds. They actually take your creds apart and they put them on a plaque here. And my badge number was 10585. That's publicly releasable information. As a matter of fact, let me tell people a PSA, because I'm in the paranormal community now, writing my books and all that. If you ever have anybody who is who claims to be an FBI agent, a CIA officer, or even a man in black claiming to be some intel, you never open the door. Well, you always get their name, John Desouza. Get their badge number. My badge number is 10585. And you take those two pieces of information, then you call 202 area code, their headquarters, wherever it is. It's always in Washington, D.C. You always call that and say, hey, I got this guy at my door. Is he really in your agency? Is he a real dude? And with those two pieces of information, you can verify anybody who's claiming to be anything. Because let me tell you something, having been in the paranormal community now for a few years, there are people who claim to be CIA officers, FBI agents, and they're not. So please always verify. Don't talk to anybody. Don't accept anybody's word. Always verify that they are who they say they are. So with those, like I said, with those two pieces of information, you can verify anybody. Uh-oh. I lost your...
No, we're here. That was user error. Okay. Thank goodness. What did you have to do to get into the FBI? Because isn't nowadays to get in, you've got to be like the creme de la creme in your field if you're in the military or law enforcement?
Yeah, it's very difficult position to get. And luckily for me, when I was 23, 24 years old, I had no idea how hard it was to get in. So it's like one of those universe things, because I didn't know how hard it was to get in. It never really became a big, very difficult for me. I just kind of fulfilled the requirements, and I got in as a special agent. And I got in at a very young age. They no longer hire you right out of law school at the age of 23, 24. Now the average age is like 32. You have to have, of course, your 4-year degree. You have to have 3 years of a graduate degree or work-related experience that they want. So, you know, most of the people that they hire are lawyers, accountants, some former teachers, engineers, and it's usually a second for the position of special agent. It's usually a second career. So yeah, so the average age now is like 32. I became a lawyer. I went to law school. I graduated from law school, but I knew I didn't really want to practice law. What I did was I wanted to do something exciting, interesting. So that's why I was recruited right out of law school into the FBI, and that's when I joined.
You know, I actually worked for the FBI for like an entire week, or no, maybe it was a couple weeks when I was 19 doing temporary service in the kitchen. I worked as a cook in the FBI building for a couple weeks as a temp. This was, geez, so I was 19 at the time. So that would have been, yeah, 20 years ago. Wow. That was
at Quantico?
No. This was in Utah. This was in Salt Lake City at the time. So
really?
Yeah. And man, what a bizarre thing. Even the lady that worked there, the main gal that worked at the restaurant, she was blind and she would take money. I mean, just talk about a weird situation, but how the FBI has changed since then. I wonder if they still hire temps to work at the restaurant as cooks. You know, that was obviously pre-2001. So, it was very interesting. Nice people there. I remember cooking up some breakfast and meeting people, and there's real nice people that work for these agencies. And one thing that I find fascinating is the amount of flack on the mainstream news that many of these agencies get. So, first of all, there's got to be good and bad in every agency, just like every organization. There's white hats and there's black hats, right?
Right. And you don't have to prompt me very much for me to criticize the FBI, but I'm for the rank and file of the Bureau. That's what I always was. I was rank and file in the streets. I was a street agent, and those are the people that I support, not the leadership of any organization. It's not the leadership that I support or that people need to support, but the rank and file people who are trying to do the right thing. And the problem is when politics gets them, and the FBI has made plenty of mistakes. You don't have to prompt me very much to talk about that, but yeah, the FBI has made plenty of mistakes, but the mistakes usually always are prompted by the political leadership, not by the rank and file people in the field out there. So that's a very important point also to distinguish.
So how did it change over the 25 years that you were in? What was it like when you started?
Well, it wasn't the way it is now. I'll tell you, it wasn't, they were allowed to do their job in the global war on terrorism, for instance. I worked on the 93 World Trade Center bombing. All of the terrorists who were involved in that, they were all put in prison for a couple of 100 years, each one. And we were prosecuting terrorists. We weren't just getting rid of them and doing what's done now. It's very different the way it's dealt with now. And now the FBI has become a lot more of a political football, especially because of the leadership you had in there who was recently removed by the president. And it was just awful because they weren't able to function anymore and do their job without politics being involved. And that's the biggest change, unfortunately, that I saw in the organization. And it broke my heart. It really made me very sad.
And 2001, after that event unfolded, did it just change everything?
It really did. It really did, especially as you got further and further into it. And you could see, I could see personally that it was not what it appeared to be, that there's so many clues coming back on that make it appear that the entire deed was somehow manufactured. I mean, it was real. People died in large numbers, and the terrorists were real too. I could tell you that and they were real. But the event itself was somehow composed, put together. It was, in a sense, artificial, and you couldn't escape that conclusion as an investigator when you see passports that are in the rubble identifying these terrorists that are completely fine, not burned in this rubble that's ash, because and also the way that the buildings were destroyed, there was some kind of next level technology that appears to have been used in addition to the real planes that really crashed into there. Also, for 9/11, I don't believe for one second that a bunch of 12th century savages were able to navigate these airliners at that airspeed in a jungle of skyscrapers and hit perfectly the way that they did those buildings. I believe they were on there. I believe it was real,
Right.
but I'm pretty sure there was some sort of next level technology, and that's what airline pilots have told me after the deed, that the level of expertise and the level of of just luck that would have had to be involved is like 1 in a million for them to just navigate that at that airspeed, that kind of plane, those kinds of planes in that field of skyscrapers, and be able to hit perfectly the target that they wanted. I mean, it's just not realistic. It's not realistic that they did that.
And what you said makes so much sense. So what would somebody that was going to design that, let's call them the dungeon master, what would they do? Well, first of all, they got to have a good patsy, right? So they get their patsy set up, they have them go train. And so, you guys are actually going to the location to train to be a pilot. Then you're on the plane that hits. So they set everything up behind the scenes. So it does make sense in those aspects. But then when you start asking questions like, well, how did Tower 7 collapse within its own footprint? It didn't even get hit by anything, and it was a heavily fortified building. And it's well, I don't know, man. It was swamp gas from Uranus. I mean, people are just, and they don't even question those things. But I do appreciate you bringing that up, and also while we're at it, I've got to ask. I mean, I'm sorry, but I have to. It's HARP's fault. It's blame them. What's up with all these false flags, John?
Yeah, these
Sandy Hook. Yeah. I could go on Boston Marathon.
Yeah. Again, what I want to emphasize, because I worked in the war on terrorism for so long, I want to emphasize with false flags, the terrorists involved are real. The civilian deaths, there are civilian deaths involved with a lot of these false flag operations that apparently are false flags, but there are real deaths involved also. And the terrorists are real, but they are what you just said. They're often patsies. They are set up to fail, set up to be caught, and set up to be very convenient for the people who really organize these deeds. And if you want to see the actual original blueprint of these false flags, all you have to do is, and this is not secret stuff, all you have to do is go look up Operation Northwoods. Operation Northwoods. That was the very first blueprint of false flag against American citizens that was put together by the CIA. And then it was taken to the Pentagon, and the Pentagon signed off on it too. And then the whole thing, it was a plan to kill American citizens on airliners, college students, and all kinds of civilian facilities, and kill them in large numbers, and then blame it on the Cubans, because at this time the CIA was completely focused on getting rid of Castro. And so this whole plan was put together. It was given to JFK, to President Kennedy, and he said, and he just had to sign off on it, and it would have gone forward. Instead, he was horrified, and he ended up firing the head of the CIA at that point and the head of the Pentagon at that time as well. It's unbelievable. But even though that plan was supposedly put in the ash heap, it wasn't. Because if you see a lot of these, if you read that plan carefully and look at the outlines of it, a lot of those details are being instituted today.
You actually trained agents how to be investigators.
Yeah, I was a legal advisor in the FBI, used to give instructions on all kinds of stuff for FBI agents. Especially investigation, things like that. So I try to bring that to people in my books as well now, especially my first book, The Para Investigators. I try to teach people what real investigation really means and what real evidence really is, because unfortunately that's been wiped out by television and by stuff where people just don't know what these things really represent, so that people themselves can function in this age of deceit that we're in. We're in an Orwellian society now, where 100% of corporate news is completely false. It's all deceit. It's all manipulation. And people just need to learn how to distinguish, how to investigate for themselves, and how to see what's real and what's not.
So there's 6 corporations that control literally over 90% of the media. Very
That's
easy to
right.
break in. And they'll
Right.
give bits and pieces of information, and then people that are in the alternative communities have to come up with their own ideas and do their own investigation. I think that about 90% of the alternative community is full of repeaters. And then
Yeah.
there's that 10% of genuine researchers.
Right.
And I do my best to research as much as I can before I turn into a repeater,
Right.
because, you know, I don't want to be repeating the same thing that Bob said just because it sounds good. So
Right.
like you brought up, it's multi-leveled, and instead of hiding the information now, just throw out so much information that it's like finding a needle in a haystack or finding a specific piece of sand on a beach. It's very difficult to do. So, you know, and I want to get into, here's what I find fascinating is the ET phenomenon, the extraterrestrial possibilities, whether they're interdimensional, whether they're physical, whether they're both. And we talked off the air about my personal beliefs, but I don't need to get into that now. I want to get into what you know, because first of all, it seems like we are being influenced from something behind the scenes. It literally feels like there is an entity that is feeding off of us that doesn't have human beings' best interests at heart.
Yes.
So what does it mean? You know, they just psychopaths and they had a bad childhood, so they just hate us.
And here's what I know for sure. What I know for sure is that for the last 60 years during the modern age, there has been this alliance between the what I call the elite powers in control, because I don't like to say the I word. I like to say the elite powers in control, these central banking bloodlines that are dominating over the nations. And there's been an uneasy alliance between them and a portion of alien visitors, of these alien visitors that are malevolent alien visitors, let's put it that way, who are somehow working with these elites. And there is a standing order that has been out for 60 years, has been out to all the nations, which just basically very simply says, do not reveal or allow to be revealed anything real concerning alien visitors, UFOs, or alien visitation in general. That order is out. That order has been in effect throughout all the nations. That's why you see whenever anything happens that's actually in the paranormal with UFOs or alien visitors that's actually real, you see this mad scramble. They don't have to wait for orders. This is a standing order that all the nations always obey and always follow to cover up anything. That's why you see this mad rush to cover up at Roswell, what happened in 1947 when we had those crashes of UFOs in Roswell, New Mexico. We just had the 70th anniversary of that event. That's why you see, even when there's a multinational event like Rendlesham Forest that involved an American military base on British soil, that in 1980, that was invaded by many UFOs and even had some nuclear devices that were shut down, some nuclear missiles that were shut down. And then you have this invasion of the base. And yet you have United States and England cooperate right away without having to be prompted. They cooperate right away in trying to cover up everything and trying to silence the soldiers that were involved, even the colonel for the entire base who was involved. They don't have to wait for orders. The cover up becomes immediate. So this order has been going on, and it goes beyond any president, any prime minister, and it's in effect all the time. Now, and then the question is, well, what's the reason for the order? What's the reason? Why is it that they just don't want? And here's the reason. Alien visitors want to be the ones to reveal themselves when the time comes. They don't want it to be interpreted or related or conveyed by anybody else, especially not the national governments. Go ahead, Edward.
Oh, this is great, and I appreciate that. So, what was it? An actual international treaty that was signed? I mean, is there some type of secret faction that? Okay, is there really men in black out there that there's an ET present? Boom, they're there.
I don't think that there was an actual treaty. I mean, there's a lot of talk that Eisenhower was involved with some kind of a meeting in a treaty that had to do with but if that had happened,
that was the one trading technology for abductees, right?
Yes. And you know what? And what's funny is I do believe that happened, but I don't think it happened with, because one of the things that the elite powers in control do. One of the parts of data flooding, which I always say, data flooding is better for tyranny than secrecy ever was. That's one of my taglines, and I say that everywhere I go. And that's because you don't need secrecy when you have data flooding. And what they'll do is they'll take real things that happen, and then they'll represent it in a false way, in a false thing that never happened. So that way, if anybody does come forward with evidence of this, hey, there was a treaty that happened between the alien back in 1940, between the alien grays and but then they already have out there in the public arena this treaty meeting between Eisenhower and the Greys that never really happened. You see, it wasn't real, and the evidence of it is also fake, very fake, with a lot of breadcrumbs of fakery all over these Majestic 12 documents, for instance, and it can be easily disproved.
You see this metal? Remember they're showing those pieces of metal that look like little pieces of tinfoil? They're like, this is from the spaceship, and it molds, and it's nanotech.
Exactly. And now the problem is is that part of data flooding is that those events could have really happened. They could have really happened, but now they're covered forever with this public announcement of fakery that is going to always cover it. So if anybody ever comes forward who's actually at the real meeting, it's no problem, because everyone will say, oh yeah, we know about that. That was debunked. That was fake. It was not true. That's just one of the layers of deceit that the elite powers in control use all the time.
Now, did you see the images from, I think his name's Paul Hellyer? He was high up in the cabinet in Canada, not the prime minister, he was below the prime minister, but he had a very prestigious position with the military. He was showing images, and they look like little grays. What would you say